The GPS DairyCAST features the high-value insights of the GPS Dairy Consulting team's trusted advisors and the owners and managers from the elite dairy farms they serve. These conversations deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders.
Welcome to the GPS DairyCAST. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen from the Up-Level Dairy Podcast, and we're coming to you from the 2025 GPS Leaders Forum. This conversation today involves Dan Olson from Forage Innovations and Nathan Pokowski from the GPS Dairy Consulting team, as they dive into the important topic of the future of BMR corn and what that means for the dairy farmer. Enjoy this conversation and more here today on the GPS DairyCAST.
Dan, I really enjoyed your conversation yesterday.
Thanks.
Really interesting with some of the things that you're looking at. Just explain kind of what you're doing in terms of your services out there.
Yeah, so Forage Innovations, we're a forage consulting company, and we build forage plans for farms. So, every farm has a dairy nutritionist, right? And they all generally have their agronomy team. And when I started Forage Innovations, the idea was to kind of bring them together because a lot of times the nutritionist and the agronomist were now like on the same page. And the thought was to kind of bridge that gap and that there'd be some efficiencies between that and maybe even thinking about nutrient management. And I would say that the dairy industry as a whole has really improved on that. Nutritionists know a lot more about agronomy than they did maybe 10 years ago. And I think some agronomists try to know more about nutrition, but some farms, it's only a Zoom call or two a year. Some, it's a visit every month. But I work with about 300 clients in 27 states.
Nice. A big topic of conversation happening right now and throughout this year as we look into next year is BMR. And BMR, it's not going to be there anymore. So what are you doing and looking at now to combat that challenge? What are some things that we can do in the diet to continue to get that digestibility?
Yeah, right. Like that's the challenge. And we've talked about this. Like it's easy to buy starch if you need it. And it's easy to buy protein if you need it. Digestible fiber is harder. And it's just really hard to replicate digestible fiber from forage. And there's byproducts we can certainly use, but it just gets harder. And so there's a couple of things that we're probably going to have to look at. And there's two real approaches to that. But maybe just taking a step back, and that is why BMR works. And that is really because it has such low amounts of undigestible fiber. And although it has a lot of digestible fiber, what really makes it special is the amount of undigestible fiber it has is really low. And that really is the limiting factor on how forages feed or how much forage we can feed. And so you can always add more energy. But when you have undigestible fiber, that's just a fixed amount that you have that you can use. And so we generally measure that with UNDF 240. And it's the most consistent nutritional measurement that I've ever came across. And so I usually use UNDF 240, or the amount of fiber undigested in 240 hours, as a metric when we're doing forage planning. The maximum amount of UNDF 240 that I usually feel like that we can put in rations is about 6% from forage. If that's of the whole diet, if you're feeding 60 pounds of dry matter, well, about 3.6 pounds of that could be undigestible fiber from forage. That means that if we want to feed a 60% forage diet, that all of our forages together have to average about 10% UNDF 240 or less. And regular corn might come back at, 10%? 9.5%, 10, something like that. 8.5. If you have a high enough starch, you can get that number down. But even good alfalfa is going to be 15, 16% UNDF 240. And a lot of other things are higher than that 10 too. And so what BMR corn did is it allowed us to feed a lot of forage and to include some other forages in. So it took the pressure off of our forage system. If we lose BMR corn, if BMR corn actually goes away, there's really two options. And the first is to feed less forage. And that's one way to drop that number, is to just feed less forage. And we're going to replace that forage with things like soy hulls, gluten, maybe beet pulp, citrus pulp, like different things like that. So digestible fiber sources. And there's some challenges with high byproduct diets, especially when it comes to things like nutrient management, but it can work. And a lot of farms in the country do use that, and it works. The other option is to work with different forages, and that's going to be, first thing is going to be eliminating the highest UNDF forages that we feed, which is usually alfalfa. So we're going to feed less of that. We're going to feed more things like ryegrass and maybe some really good trit. But
so is it a blend? Do you think we're going to be blending more of these haelages then to get that UNDF 240 down? And I always look at it, what's the risk when you put that grass into a haylage? The grass heads out, it takes over the haylage crop. I've fed a lot of grasses earlier in my career, and yeah, the digestibility is great, but man, if that thing heads out, we could be in trouble.
Exactly, especially on first crop. So the risk level, the management level on that side of it just gets a lot harder. I mean, BMR corn, for all of its flaws in trying, challenges maybe growing it, whether it's fungicides or standability or whatever, once we have it growing, it's still the most consistent product that we have. Like the ability to put up a 50,000 ton pile of something that's more or less the same from one end to the other is, I don't know anything else that we can replace that with. Anything else we do is going to have more variability, whether because of multiple harvests, because of field variability, less yield per acre. But yeah, if we do eliminate BMR corn, we are going to have to think about ways to put more grass into our rotations. And then it comes back to, well, what species, what variety, what management. And we'll figure it out, and we can, but it's going to be a learning curve, and it's certainly more challenging than what we have been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's come up in conversation is short corn, and you talked about that yesterday in your presentation. And so, what are the pros and cons of short corn? What are you seeing? I know you mentioned that, the worry there could be the starch that you're bringing in from the short corn into the diet.
Yeah, so I've been looking at short corn for quite a few years, and in the last 3 years, I've been doing research trials in a number of locations with it, and it is better. Like when you talk about fiber digestibility, the thing that really impacts fiber digestibility is not so much the amount of lignin, but how that lignin is cross-linked with the fiber. And that's like, so even like UNDF 240, if we go way back to that number, we always used to use lignin as that kind of baseline, right? But we started finding out that lignin didn't always give us a true feel for it. And that's because there's a certain percentage of the fiber that is so tightly cross-linked with the lignin that even after 10 days of sitting in rumen fluid doesn't digest. Like we said, like you could throw this conference table in some rumen fluid and some of it's going to digest in 10 days. And that is really just a natural defense mechanism of a plant. When it feels the need to, and it's not unique to corn, really any plant will do this. If it feels the need to, it will cross-link lignin with the fiber, and it allows it to stand, to reach a reproductive state, to produce for the next generation. Now, BMRs are dumb. Like that's their flaw, okay? They don't do that. They fall over, potentially. But that's what makes them so special. But a normal corn cross-links. And so when you have resistance, when you give it a reason to, digestibilities go down. And generally, that's why taller, like these leafy corns that get 14 feet tall, they usually have really bad digestibility. Short corn, by lowering the stature, will improve digestibility. And it's not BMR corn, though. It just isn't. If you look on a UNDF 240 number, it's not that much different, but that's largely because it has a lot more starch. You eliminated a lot of the fodder. You increased the percentage of the grain in the corn silage. So you're going to get maybe a 3-4 point digestibility bump over regular corn, and you're going to get somewhat of a starch bump, maybe. But it's not BMR corn. And especially when you start looking at UNDF 240 as a percentage of the fiber, it's just not that much different from regular corn.
GPS Dairy Consulting goes beyond nutrition by offering tools and resources, broad multidisciplined experience, and a collaborative philosophy across a range of consulting services that will make your business more successful. How will GPS consultants do that? By collaborating with you and your team to solve challenges and create successes while achieving sustainable and profitable results, by fostering personal growth and leadership development, and by inspiring continuous change and improvement in your people, systems, and results. GPS Dairy Consulting LLC will go beyond nutrition to help you achieve your most challenging goals. Learn more and connect with a GPS consultant at gpsdairy.com.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting is you talked about thunderstorms and how that even sets up that cross-linking. You know, the plant is saying that, well, I don't want to fall over again, so I'm going to just get stronger, and it builds up this cross-linking. We've oftentimes maybe think about other types of stress, whether it's heat stress or drought stress or some of these things, but I found it interesting on the thunderstorm comment that you made. Yeah,
you get a summer with a number of strong wind events, and that plant gets beat up all night in a 60-mile-an-hour wind, and the next day it's like, hey, I'm gonna cross-link some lignin fiber. Next time that happens, I'm going to be more prepared for it. And if you get 3-4 of those times through a growing season, especially at certain times, it can really negatively impact quality.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned about and talked about yesterday, we had a good conversation, was planning population. Yeah. And what does that do to the fiber and the digestibility? And what should we be looking at that as we try to take a conventional corn and improve digestibility without having that BMR now?
So that is one option. When we think of that, there's a number of different ways to get structural integrity. And any engineer would tell you that diameter can help as well. I talk about like windmills, and every so often you see one of them fall over too. But they get structural integrity through diameter. Like if you took all that steel and you melted it down into a solid rod and ran it 200 feet up in the air, it would be flopping all over the place. But because of diameter, they're able to get structural integrity. And a corn stalk is much the same way. Like if you can get stalk expansion, if you can turn a corn stalk from a 3/4 inch diameter to an 1.25 inch diameter, it doesn't feel the need to cross-link lignin as much. And so it gets structural integrity that way. The other thing it does is that it increases the more digestible portion of a corn stalk, which is the interior, and it in relation to the undigestible portion, which is that rind on the outside. And so you're just messing with ratios there. There again, that product on a low pop corn is not BMR corn. We're getting a digestibility that's better than conventional. Like we can get 3-4 points digestibility increase. And you usually get a starch bump as well, because a lot of times you're getting more double cobbing and more adequate ear fill. But it's still not BMR corn. And I think that's certainly an option. I work with hundreds of thousands of cows that have pulled planting populations back on conventional corn over the last 5-6 years. I've done quite a bit of work on trying to identify hybrids that will respond to spacing. That's the challenge with that, is that not all corn does. And actually, a minority of corn will respond consistently to spacing. But if you can find hybrids that will and put them in a system with low enough populations, maybe 26,000 or something like that, we can consistently get digestibilities in that 60+% range with mid to upper 30 starch levels, and it makes a product that's very usable.
Yeah, I've got a couple clients in Michigan now that have went on BMR, and now we're going to pull it away from them. And it's like, man, we saw some really good performance. And I said, I'd love to take credit for it, but it was just bringing more digestible fiber. You're talking about a portion of your diet that's a large portion of your diet, and you just brought all this good fiber in for the cows.
It made a lot of nutritionists look really good, so you might as well take some credit.
Yeah.
No, it's the easiest. It's the easiest milk we've ever had, right? If this went away like cold turkey tomorrow, it would be way more devastating to the industry than, say, when BST went away or something, like at least on the farms that have really adapted it and are using it. The people who have marketed BMR will tell you that over the last 3-4 years, sales have declined in BMR, and that there are less acres being planted in it than there was then. And I think that's largely because a lot of the farms that are in growth mode and that have expanded or built new in the last 5 to 10 years are primarily working with growers to grow a lot of their own crops. And that is a challenge. How do you price it? How do you grow it? What does it look like in crop rotations if you're not controlling your own acres?
Do you think some of it might have been, though, standability? There's some clients that I work with in Michigan, and there's nothing worse than seeing that stuff blown all over the field. Coming out. And I do believe what you're saying in terms of growth mode and that. I did have a client that decided to pull away from it just because he got blown over. Like you said, BMR's not very intelligent. So.
And it can happen, and it's even worse when it happens on a grower, right? You know, so we've learned a lot about BMRs, I think, on how to grow them even. And when we talk about populations, that's one thing. I keep my populations on BMRs really low. 26, 27, 28,000 max populations. And that takes care of a lot of the standability issues. Okay. But, hey, it can happen, and it certainly happens with a higher percentage than it does with conventionals.
So,
although I would say I was in South Dakota this year, and I put a plot on a farm that experienced like 130 mile an hour wind, and I drove out there the next day to check on my crops out there, and the BMR corn in the plot actually survived better than the conventional because everything else snapped. Like it actually broke, and the BMR didn't look great, but it had enough flex.
Yeah. There are still going to be some BMRs in the market. And one of the things you talked about, and again, I'm not an agronomist, and I learned was the like BM1 or 3 and understanding what that means and how it relates to, I guess, cross-linking with those plants.
Yeah. So what makes BMRs unique is not so much that they have that much less lignin than a normal plant. They do generally have a little less lignin. But what makes it unique is that lignin is not cross-linked with all the fiber. It's concentrated in that mid-rib, and that's what makes it brown or reddish. But there's different concentrations of that BMR gene. And it's kind of ironic because we're sitting here in Minnesota today, and we're only 20, 30 miles from St. Paul, where the BMR gene was discovered in 1924. And so it's kind of interesting. And it's not a genetically modified trait. It was an anomaly, and it was identified. And that wasn't really brought to market till the 90s, I believe. But those original ones they had like the BM3 gene. And even though they were extremely high digestible fiber levels, the agronomics were just really bad. So suffered from yield, they suffered from starch contents. Some of the stuff that's currently on the market that would have came more from the DuPont side of things, the Pioneer side of it, would be more BM1s. And those have better agronomics. They're not as good at digestibility as the BM3s, but it was kind of like the happy medium that they were trying to reach. Over the next few years, it feels like those are the ones that are going to be left. So like the unifieds that Brevant had, those are pretty much all gone, I think. Those were BM3s. They were extremely high quality. So what's going to be left on the Corteva side is probably going to be BM1s. Kingfisher still is pretty active in the BMR side of things, and they're working to ramp that up. I don't know like how fast they're going to be able to do that, if they're going to be able to grow as fast as Corteva is getting out of the industry. So there might be some uncomfortable overlap there in the middle, but they're pretty committed to the BMR thing now. And that's a BM3 product as well.
I've really appreciated this conversation, Dan. It's been great to learn a little bit more about where we're at with BMR, where we're going, some things that we can do to look at planting populations and such to just get better, what we're going to do with haylage, or be less haylage, more corn silage. I think there's a lot of things to be considered. I've appreciated your time. And for our audience, I know I've read through a lot of your articles on emails, and where can they go to find more of your information?
Yeah, just go to my website, forageinnovations.guru, and you can find some resources there and, of course, contact information for me, my team. We'll get through it. We always do, right? I mean, farmers are great at innovating. There's lots of options. There's things we can do. It's just going to be, well, honestly, it's a little frustrating because you build a system. You're like, hey, this is something that works on our farm. We got this down pat. We're going to focus on the next thing, and now we got to come back and revisit this and try to fix it again. That's the frustrating part about all this, I think. And farmers, we don't have enough to worry about,
Well, it's the frustrating part that gives us a challenge that makes our job fun, too.
Yeah.
Fun, and then sometimes the frustrating, it's not. But once you get there, it's about seeing the performance, the production, and putting the plan in place. So,
and we'll be having a lot of these discussions on farms because that is finding out what works for what farm. There's going to be a number of different options to get there. There'll be a number of different ways to approach this, and none of them are going to be a complete replacement for BMR corn. I mean, unless you're switching from a Corteva to a Kingfisher, pretty much the same product. But if we actually move away, there's not going to be we're going to have to be a multifaceted approach, and it can be done.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for your time and look forward to hearing more.
Okay, thanks for having me.
You just heard from Dan Olson of Forage Innovations and Nathan Pokowski from the GPS Dairy Consulting team here on the GPS DairyCast. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen from the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. And please join us back here again for the next GPS DairyCast.
The GPS DairyCast features conversations that deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders. If this GPS DairyCast has you looking for more ways to become an elite dairy producer, find more information in our show notes on how you can add a GPS advisor to your team.